Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Page 16. Determining the appropriate scope of work is an ongoing process and can change during the assignment based on information and conditions learned by the appraiser, which can lead to modification of the scope of work. The scope of work an appraiser performs should not be limited by the client or intended user to the extent that credible results cannot be obtained or results are biased. Data collection. There are two sources from which data is collected in appraisal assignments: data from primary sources and data from secondary sources. Information from primary data sources is data that is discovered by the appraiser, such as through a direct interview or through the appraiser's personal investigation. Data that might be collected through primary sources includes, but is not limited to, comparable sale transaction details from a participant to the transaction, gross living area calculations of the comparable or the subject that are taken from the appraiser's measurements and calculated by the appraiser, physical characteristics and features of the comparable and/or subject property gathered through a personal inspection, market condition trends gathered through a personal interview with individuals and entities, income data gathered from landlords in the market, information from secondary data sources is data that is compiled by other parties and used by the appraiser. Just as an example, sources could include auditor or assessor's records, other appraisers, public records, published data, multiple listing services, MLS, etc. Many times the appraiser must rely on secondary data because gathering the information firsthand is not practical or possible, or the data pertains to a topic that the appraiser would need special. The appraiser scope of work decision includes the type and extent of property identification or inspection, and the research and analysis to apply in the appraisal assignment. One of the primary is what called the landlords look for relevant things, extra notes, primary data, assessor's records. No is gather income data from landlords. Page 17. Expertise in order to determine by themselves, such as flood elevation information. Secondary data might include, but is not limited to, comparable sales and income data gathered from other sources. Physical information regarding the subject or the comparable sales obtained from outside sources such as public records. Demographic and economic data published by others. Rates of capitalization supplied by national surveys. This is a good time to discuss the reliability of the data the appraiser collects from other sources, especially secondary sources, regarding the property characteristics. The comment to Standards Rule 1-2I-V or 5 states in part, the information used by an appraiser to identify the property characteristics must be from sources that the appraiser reasonably believes are reliable. Therefore, when the appraiser is relying on information provided by others, the appraiser must be reasonably certain that the information can be depended on to produce credible results. Standards Rule 1-4 of USPAP requires the appraiser, in part, to collect, verify, and analyze all information necessary for credible assignment results. For example, verification might be confirming a comparable sales transaction reported in a multiple listing service with another source, such as public records or a participant of the transaction. Often, the use of an extraordinary assumption regarding the use of some of the data should be considered. If using the data with extraordinary assumption would still produce credible assignment results. For example, an exterior inspection for the purpose of an exterior-only appraisal may include an extraordinary assumption about physical characteristics of the interior of the property. Details about the physical characteristics of the property interior are often from other sources, such as the property owner, the client, tax records, multiple listing service, or even a past appraisal assignment work file. If the appraiser could reasonably rely on these sources but not examine them firsthand, an extraordinary assumption may need to be used. Of course, the appraiser must ensure that the scope of work, including the use of the extraordinary assumption, would produce credible results. Extra note: if you do drive-bys, you had better put in an extraordinary assumption.